did the mythbusters ascertain that these are the chemicals involved in the formation of the fountain? Okay, they have actually carried out a series of mini investigations in their attempt to answer these questions. So they started with various hypotheses from their questions, derived from their questions, and they craft an experiment based on their hypothesis, okay, to investigate and validate their hypothesis. The crafting of testable hypotheses actually helped them to scope their experiment. For example, when they wanted to investigate about the role of carbon dioxide in the formation of the fountain, okay, they came up with a hypothesis that if carbon dioxide is absent in the Coke, okay, the fountain will not be formed. And this is a prediction that they had before they carry out their investigation. So when they carry out their investigation, they can craft an experiment in which they add Mentos candy into a sample of Coke without carbon dioxide and observe what happened. And true enough, okay, there was no fountain observed, so it proved that their hypothesis is valid. And CO2 is responsible for the formation of the fountain. However, at the end of this investigation, it actually generated even more questions. Okay, they started to think about what the other ingredients present in Coke. Do they also contribute, or is CO2 the sole factor responsible for the fountain? So they crafted hypotheses to see whether the addition of these individual ingredients to plain soda will actually increase the height of the fountain caused by the plain soda and Mentos. So after concluding, okay, that aspartame, caffeine, and potassium benzoate actually caused the height of the fountain to increase when it was added into plain soda, okay, they started to think about the ingredients in Mentos, and they formulated similar hypotheses and tested these hypotheses in experiment. So the crafting of a testable hypothesis from our questions is really important because they help to scope the objectives of the research and identify the variables that we are going to change, measure, and observe in our experiment. When you are reading research papers, it will be helpful if you are able to identify the hypothesis of the researcher, which prompted him to carry out his investigation. Okay, so I have an example here. This is actually a paper on how formation of nickel oxide layer, okay, carried out by oxidation of the nickel metal, can be carried out at different temperatures to change the property of the resulting oxide layer. So they do have an idea that the temperature at which this oxidation reaction occur will result in product with different properties. Okay, so they try to test whether this is true. So the hypothesis would be that the temperature at which this thermal oxidation of nickel was carried out, okay, will affect the physical and chemical properties of the product, the nickel oxide layer form. Another example, okay, this is actually a paper on the synthesis of silver and gold metal nanoparticles. Okay, however, the procedure that was used from the past, okay, was not very efficient. So the researchers actually tried to add in something different or modify the procedure, and they succeeded in assembling stable silver and gold noble metal nanoparticles by adding tartaric acid in their procedure. Okay, so before they started the experiment, they already had a prediction that tartaric acid will help to stabilize the reaction and give good products. Okay, so the hypothesis of this paper would be the use of tartaric acid will allow the formation of stable gold and silver nanoparticle assemblies. Now, these examples that I've shown you, they are actually quite general because I did not want to go into the details of the paper. Now, when we talk about the properties, the physical and chemical properties, this is a very general term. There are so many physical and chemical properties. Which one do we measure? We can't possibly measure all, we can't possibly observe all. So there usually are a few properties that the researcher is interested in and would measure in the experiment. So when you are given the opportunity to read the paper, the hypothesis that you can derive should be much more detailed. So these properties, you must define what it means. It could be that the chemical reactivity of the nickel oxide layer would be increased, or the shape of the nickel oxide layer will be more symmetric. The electrical properties of the nickel oxide layer will be changed. So define physical and chemical properties. The second example, when we say stable gold and silver nanoparticles, what does it mean to be stable? What are the things that are being measured to indicate to the scientist or the researcher that this means that the product is stable? So you have to define the parameters that are being measured. So these variables that are being measured, are called the dependent variables. So when it comes to crafting our experiment, we have to decide on the definition of what is stable, and what are the things that we want to measure in our experiment to give us information about the independent variable.